They say loyalty is a virtue, but what if it goes too far? In New York City in the 1920s, the most feared man was not the police commissioner or the mayor. It was a simple gangster named Charles Luciano. That's because he knew how to get under their skin. He managed to turn the police against each other, the politicians against the people, and all for his own benefit. But how did he do it? Welcome to my channel. Today let's find out Mafia. His loyalty made him dangerous. Charles Luciano's parents were poor Sicilian immigrants who worked long hours just to make ends meet. Charles was born into this world of struggle and hardship, and learned early on that life was tough and getting tougher. By the time he was 10 years old, he had already been arrested twice for stealing food. When he turned 16, he dropped out of school and started working as a messenger at a local bar. But soon he moved on to more lucrative crimes. At 18, he became part of a gang led by a man named Manfredi, where he met another young man who would later become famous, Frank Castellano. Together, they planned and executed several robberies, which made them quite wealthy. But then the police caught up with them. They were charged with robbery and sent to prison. There they spent 6 years together planning their next moves. Once released, they went straight back to crime. They robbed banks, grocery stores, even a U.S. Marshal's home. Their gang grew rapidly and so did their wealth, but it wasn't easy. They had enemies everywhere, especially the police. The only way to stay ahead of the cops was to have a mole inside the force. That's when Charles Luciano got the idea that would change everything. It happened when he heard two cops talking about an upcoming police ball, and one of them said he couldn't go because he didn't have a date. So Luciano took advantage of the situation. He asked Castellano to find a nice-looking girl who could pass as his sister. Then he invited the cop who didn't have a date to take his fake sister to the ball. Of course, the cop accepted the invitation. The plan worked perfectly. Luciano paid off the girl and she agreed to play along. They met at the bar, picked up the cop, and headed to the dance floor. As soon as the music started playing, Luciano whispered something to her, and she immediately broke down in tears. The cop rushed to comfort her and soon found himself in a compromising position. Another cop witnessed the whole thing and demanded an explanation. When the cop tried to defend himself, Luciano stepped in and said, "Don't bother, you're both suspended." The cops were shocked. They never guessed it was all a setup. But now they had no choice but to listen, as Luciano threatened to expose them unless they gave him what he wanted. And that's how Charles Luciano, the feared mafia boss, was born. Luciano realized the power of blackmail and used it to his advantage over the years. He built his criminal empire on the backs of people like Louis, a man who made millions off numbers betting. Luciano forced Louis to pay him 5% of his profits, and when Louis refused, he was beaten bloody. Despite the pain, Louis still refused to give in. So Luciano's men took away his son and used him as leverage. This went on for months until one day Luciano called Louis and told him to meet him at a secret location. When Louis arrived, he found his son tied up and gagged. Luciano stood over them both with a knife and said, "Either you pay me what I want or I kill your boy." After that, Louis agreed to give him 5%. It wasn't just money. Luciano also used blackmail to control the city's politicians. He knew all their secrets and wasn't afraid to use them against them. Once he even threatened to expose a popular politician's mistress unless he got what he wanted. The politician had no choice but to comply. But despite all his power and wealth, Luciano was always on the run from the cops. He knew they were after him, so he always had to be careful. He changed his appearance often, growing a mustache or wearing sunglasses to disguise himself. He also had a team of lookouts who would alert him if the police were near. Sometimes he even carried a gun, though he tried not to use it because he knew it would draw too much attention. But there were times when he had no choice, like the time when he was ambushed by rival gangsters. Luciano's men surrounded him and opened fire. He returned the shots, but he was outnumbered and soon found himself wounded and on the run. He managed to escape, but it was a close call. It made him realize how dangerous his enemies were and how important it was to be prepared. To stay ahead of the cops and his enemies, Luciano created a secret organization. He recruited trusted men from different gangs and formed a powerful alliance. These men were loyal to him, and him alone. They were the ones he turned to when he needed help, whether it was to collect money, plan an attack, or gather intelligence. Luciano knew he could count on them no matter what, and it wasn't just because they were loyal. It was because they respected him. They respected his intelligence, his cunning, and his ruthlessness. He was someone they looked up to and were willing to die for. That's why when the police finally caught up with Luciano, they were shocked to find out that most of his men refused to cooperate. They remained silent, even when threatened, until they were all sentenced to long prison terms. The authorities thought they had won a major victory, but they had no idea what was really going on behind bars. In prison, Luciano continued to be the boss. He ran his criminal empire from his cell, giving orders and collecting money. He also made new alliances and set plans in motion that would make him even more powerful once he was released. But how did he do it? Well, it all had to do with the way he treated his men. Luciano was generous to those who were loyal to him, rewarding them with money, power, and protection. He also knew how to motivate them, appealing to their greed, ambition, and sense of honor. And when they were arrested, he didn't forget about them. He paid their bail, hired lawyers, and made sure they were taken care of. That kind of loyalty was unheard of in the criminal world, but Luciano didn't care what people thought of him. He knew that loyalty was a powerful force, and he used it to his advantage. But it wasn't just about being loyal to him. Luciano encouraged his men to be loyal to each other as well, created a sense of brotherhood among them, a bond that went beyond their criminal activities. They were family to him, and he expected them to treat each other like it. That meant protecting each other's interests, helping each other out, and being there for each other through thick and thin. That kind of loyalty was rare in the criminal world, where everyone was out for himself. But Luciano knew it was an asset. He knew that if his men were loyal to each other, they would be unstoppable. Of course, it wasn't always easy. There were times when their loyalty was put to the test, when they had to choose between their own interests and the interests of their fellow gangsters. But in the end, they always chose loyalty. They knew that it was what made them strong and what made them fearsome. That's why when the police finally caught up with Luciano and his men, they were in for a big surprise. They thought they had broken up the biggest crime syndicate in history, but they had no idea what was really going on. Because in the criminal world, loyalty is the ultimate weapon, and Luciano and his men had it in spades. After serving 7 years in prison, Luciano was released, but he was far from finished. With the help of his loyal allies, he quickly rebuilt his criminal empire and went on to become one of the most powerful mob bosses of all time. He was a master manipulator who knew how to control the minds of men, and his skills were unmatched. So what can we learn from the story of Mafia boss Charles Luciano? Well, for one thing, we can see the importance of loyalty. Luciano was able to build a powerful criminal empire because he knew how to inspire loyalty in others. He treated his men well, rewarded their loyalty, and appealed to their sense of brotherhood. We can also see the power of manipulation. Luciano was a master manipulator who knew how to control the minds of men. He was able to blackmail cops and politicians, get inside information, and turn people against each other. Finally, we can see the importance of being prepared. Luciano was always ready for anything. He had a team of lookouts, was always careful, and never took chances unnecessarily. Thanks for watching. See you next time.